Mom threw her wine at me when she realized I was a CEO. Then my sister tried to contest Grandma's will, so I destroyed her entire career by defeat her in court. My family spent 28 years treating me like an invisible background character while worshipping my golden child sister, eventually cutting me out of the holidays entirely when they realized I had secretly become a self-made tech millionaire. But when my sister tried to drag me into court to steal the massive inheritance our grandmother rightfully left me, she didn't realize I had found decades of hidden journals documenting their abuse. I didn't just defeat her in front of a judge, I released a documentary that permanently dismantled her career, her reputation, and the entire family's fake perfect image. Original post: My name is Julian, and I'm 28 years old. I currently live in Chicago, and I don't just mean I rent a decent place in the suburbs. I live in a sprawling, 4,500 square foot penthouse in the Gold Coast. I have floor-to-ceiling windows that offer an unobstructed, dizzying view of Lake Michigan, polished imported marble floors that reflect the city lights at night, and a private elevator that opens directly into my foyer. But if you were to ask my family to describe me, they wouldn't mention any of that. They'd probably still describe me as Chloe's quiet, awkward little brother. Not because I am actually quiet, but because they simply never bothered to listen to a word I said. I guess every family has their favorite, but ours didn't even pretend to hide it. Chloe, my older sister by 3 years, has always been the absolute golden child. Since the day she was born, she was the family's shining star. She was the first to walk, the first to talk. She was the one who won the state mock trial championships, the girl who had the perfect custom-tailored prom dress, the one who always knew exactly what to say to make adults fawn over her. And me? I was just the kid who didn't need much. That was my mother Brenda's favorite way of justifying the massive disparity in how we were treated. Julian doesn't mind, she'd say with a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand, whenever a relative questioned why Chloe got a brand new car for her sweet 16 while my birthday was just a lukewarm pizza dinner at home. Chloe's milestones were celebrated with rented banquet halls, professional photographers, and ice sculptures. Mine were barely a footnote. It was like watching someone be handed the blazing sun, while you're patted on the head and told, hey, there's still a little bit of starlight left over. That counts, too, right? I didn't resent Chloe at first. Not when we were really little. She was just my big sister, and I thought she was cool. She painted her nails in weird colors, blasted loud music in her room, and taught me how to tell fake friends from real ones on the playground. But over time, the dynamic shifted. She started treating me the exact same way everyone else in our family did, like I was some irrelevant background prop in the movie of her spectacular life. She would smile brightly at me when the home video camera was rolling, but completely dismiss me the second it was turned off. My mom, Brenda, certainly didn't help the situation. She was pathologically obsessed with appearances. Our family holiday cards had to be perfectly color coordinated. Her social media posts were curated like high-end museum exhibits, and Chloe, naturally, was always the centerpiece. The future high-powered lawyer, the beauty with brains, the ultimate pride of the family. I still vividly remember my mom bragging at Thanksgiving dinner a few years ago. Chloe got into Northwestern law, she announced, her voice trembling with manufactured pride. Early decision, full ride. The entire table erupted into applause. Then, almost as an afterthought, my mom turned to me and said, Julian, are you still doing that little computer stuff in your bedroom? I had just landed my first paid internship at a major software startup, but I didn't say anything. I just smiled tightly, looked down at my plate, and passed the gravy. That was the game we played. Stay quiet, stay small, stay out of the way. I got incredibly good at it. Until I didn't. Things started shifting dramatically after college. I moved to the city and told them I was working in IT, which was technically true, but I was also building my own software on the side. 2 years later, I had launched my own company, an AI-driven supply chain logistics platform. I had no loans, no financial help from my parents, just endless lines of code, gallons of black coffee, and brutal nights spent debugging until my eyes stung and my vision blurred. I didn't tell my family about my success, not because I was actively hiding it, but because they literally never asked. I think the very first time Chloe noticed I might have changed was at my dad's retirement dinner. It was held at some overpriced, stuffy country club in the suburbs. We were all crammed around a long mahogany table under massive crystal chandeliers. Chloe showed up 45 minutes late, wearing a stunning crimson designer dress, acting like she was walking a Hollywood red carpet rather than coming to honor the man who had paid for her entire undergraduate tuition. My parents immediately stood up to greet her, knocking over a water glass in the process. My Aunt Helen scooted over to make room. My dad clapped like an angel had just descended from heaven. I just sat there in the corner, quietly sipping my bourbon. When she finally noticed me sitting there, she tilted her head, looked me up and down, and said, "Oh, wow, Julian, you've really grown into your face." I smiled back, maintaining total eye contact. "And you've grown into your personality, Chloe." There was a heavy beat of dead silence, And then she let out a loud, fake laugh like it was a joke, but I meant every single word of it. Later that night, as we all toasted my dad, Chloe stood up and gave a speech. It was incredibly long, flowery, and entirely overly dramatic. She even quoted Churchill at one point. She called him her hero, her rock, the wind beneath her wings. Everyone clapped until their hands were red. Then my mom nudged me sharply in the ribs. "Say a few words, sweetie, don't be rude." I stood up, cleared my throat, and kept it very short. I thanked my dad for teaching me how to work hard, how to stay disciplined, and how to be entirely independent. It was simple. But it was true. As I sat back down, I clearly heard Chloe whisper to her fiancé, "God, he's so socially awkward." And they both laughed. Loud enough for me to hear it perfectly. Loud enough for everyone at the table to pretend they didn't. That night, I walked out to the freezing parking lot completely alone while Chloe was surrounded by a mob of relatives and friends taking endless selfies. The funny thing is, by that point, I could have easily afforded to leave in a chauffeur-driven Maybach. I could have flown home in a private helicopter if I wanted to. But I still drove the exact same used Honda Civic I bought 6 years ago. Just because I'd outgrown them financially didn't mean I was done with them. Not yet. Then came Grandma Rose's 75th birthday party. Grandma Rose is the absolute only person in my entire extended family who ever treated me like I actually mattered as a human being. She used to mail me thick sci-fi novels when I was little. She would send me old, dense computer manuals she found at garage sales, with little sticky notes in the margins saying things like, "I don't understand a word of this, but I bet my genius grandson will." We weren't constantly calling each other, but we had a very deep, quiet bond. She actually saw me. I absolutely did not want to miss her big day. It was a huge, pretentious gathering at this massive, fancy estate out in Lake Geneva. My mom had planned it like it was a royal coronation. We had matching family polo shirts, rigidly coordinated speech schedules, and a massive projector slideshow spanning 7 decades of Grandma's life. Chloe was, of course, the master of ceremonies. She wore a pale blue silk dress and expensive heels that clicked loudly and obnoxiously on the hardwood floors. Her voice boomed confidently through the microphone. She managed to force herself to cry at least 3 separate times during her introduction. "This incredible woman raised us," she said dramatically, wiping away a non-existent tear. "She taught me what it means to be a woman of true strength and endless grace." She looked directly at me when she said the word grace, then quickly looked away with a slight smirk. I stood near the back of the room by the patio doors, holding a glass of sparkling water, just watching the circus. People circulated around the room, gossiping, laughing, drinking heavily. My cousin Sophie eventually wandered over to me and said, "Hey Julian, is it true you're working in tech now?" Before I could answer, Chloe materialized out of nowhere and chimed in, "Oh, he just fixes internet routers or something for a little startup." I laughed softly, "Something like that." Then my uncle Marcus, who is notoriously loud and nosy, joined our little circle. "You still living in that tiny, depressing apartment out in the suburbs, Julian?" I took a slow sip of my water and shrugged. "Nah, I moved a while ago." Uncle Marcus raised a bushy eyebrow. "Oh yeah, where to? The city?" I nodded. "Yeah, downtown." He whistled loudly. "Downtown Chicago? That's not cheap, kid." "Where exactly?" I looked out the window at the manicured lawns for a second before answering. "Gold Coast." They both blinked in unison. Sophie laughed nervously. "You're messing with us. Gold Coast is billionaire territory." I smiled warmly. "Nope. I'm on the top floor. 2 massive balconies. I've got a pretty clear, unobstructed view of Lake Michigan." I didn't say it to show off. It just naturally came out. For once in my entire life, I didn't instinctively downplay my existence. Across the room, I saw Chloe completely freeze mid-conversation. Her head whipped around so fast I thought she might snap her neck. My mom, who was standing a few feet away, suddenly stopped smiling. The wine glass in her hand began to tremble visibly. Uncle Marcus stared at me like he was frantically recalibrating the entire mental image he had of who I was, like I'd just stepped out of the shadows and ruined his favorite painting. And then it happened. My mom, who usually never drank more than 1 polite glass of wine at family events, suddenly lifted her glass and threw it straight at the floor. The $20 Cabernet splashed across the pristine white marble tiles in a violent, perfect arc, the glass shattering into 100 pieces. She didn't say a single word. She just turned and stormed toward the back patio doors like she was suffocating and desperately needed air. Chloe looked absolutely furious, but it wasn't just confusion on her face, it was sheer panic. And then Uncle Marcus, usually so loud and aggressively opinionated, said very quietly, almost like he was just thinking aloud to himself, "Huh, I guess Brenda backed the wrong kid." That was the exact moment the entire room truly went dead silent. People turned their heads. Grandma Rose blinked in surprise. Chloe's cheeks flushed a deep, angry crimson. And for the very first time in my 28 years of life, I wasn't the one being completely ignored. I was the absolute center of gravity in the room. And the crazy part was, I hadn't even really started yet. I didn't say anything else for a while after that night. I just left the Lake Geneva estate with a tight, satisfied smile and took a slow, peaceful walk back to my car while the rest of them frantically fumbled around in damage control mode. I didn't owe them a single explanation. Not then. Not after decades of them pretending I didn't exist unless they specifically needed something heavy moved, a computer fixed, or a dinner bill quietly paid. But that precise moment, the dramatic wine throw, the suffocating silence, Uncle Marcus's accidental, brutal truth, it was a massive crack in the family wall. And once a wall that thick cracks, it doesn't stay standing for very long. 2 days later, my mom finally called me. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't offer an apology for hurling a glass of red wine across a crowded room in front of 70 family members and friends. She just went straight into the attack, her voice tight and strained like she was holding her breath. Julian, you really should have told us about the penthouse. I leaned back on my expensive leather couch, crossing one leg over the other, just staring out at the gorgeous city skyline through my massive windows. Why? You weren't exactly interested when I got my first apartment. You didn't even help me move. She completely ignored that. It just caught everyone incredibly off guard. You made your sister look bad. There it was. Not, you embarrassed me. Not, you shocked the family. But, you made Chloe look bad. I held the phone to my ear and just let the silence sit there for a few agonizing seconds. Is that what this is really about, Mom? Her voice hardened into ice. Don't act like you don't know exactly what you did. You knew how it would make her feel. She's been under a tremendous amount of pressure lately at her law firm. She's trying to make partner. I interrupted her smoothly. Mom, she's 31 years old. I'm 28. We are both adults. If me having a nice apartment threatens her entire existence, that sounds like a her problem. She is doing something incredibly important with her life. My mom snapped. And I wasn't. That was the heavy implication. It has always been the implication. If I wasn't carrying a briefcase to a courtroom or quoting Winston Churchill at fancy cocktail parties, my life simply wasn't worth acknowledging. I hung up the phone not long after that. I did it politely, calmly, without raising my voice, but my chest burned with a deep, toxic anger for hours afterward. The very next week, I got a text message from Chloe. Chloe, just wanted to say congrats. Mom said you got a nice place. Me, thanks, Chloe. Chloe, hope it's not too much pressure having to keep up with something that expensive in the city. You know tech startups fail every day, right? Me. Hope the law firm isn't too much pressure pretending you still actually care about your clients. She didn't respond. I will fully admit I was being a little petty there, but it wasn't just a random jab. It was a very specific reference that I knew she would understand. Years ago, before she even started law school, Chloe confessed to me after 3 large glasses of cheap vodka on my old, stained couch that she didn't even like the law. She hated arguing. She had only picked it because of our mom. Because our family absolutely worshipped the prestigious idea of having Chloe the high-powered attorney to brag about on their holiday cards, she actually wanted to be a baker. She used to bake these incredible, complex pastries, full of flavor and creativity, but she buried that deep down because being a baker wasn't prestigious enough for Brenda's country club friends. She actively chose their toxic approval over her own genuine happiness. Maybe that's the absolute only thing we ever had in common. Except, I eventually stopped chasing their approval. She never did. A few months passed. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I didn't get invited, actually. My mom sent a massive group text to the extended family, complete with a ridiculous flyer-style invitation she made in Canva, titled Giving Thanks with the Family and dictating a dress code of autumnal elegance. It was genuinely nauseating. Chloe's name was listed right under the Hosted By section in a fancy, sweeping italic font. My name wasn't on it, not even in the tiny body text at the bottom. So, I replied to the entire group chat, just to test the waters. Just checking in, what should I bring? No response. Not for 6 long hours. Then, finally, a direct message from my mom. Actually, Julian, it's going to be a very small, intimate gathering this year. Just immediate family. Immediate family. Like I was some distant, extended relative. I scrolled back through the group list. There were second cousins and great aunts on that list. People I hadn't seen since I was in middle school. But I wasn't invited. Not officially. Not really. Chloe didn't say a single word to defend me, and that is exactly when something permanent shifted inside my chest. Before, I had been annoyed. I had been hurt, sure, but I was still grounded, still somewhat rational. I figured they'd always overlook me, and that was just the sad pattern of my life. But this was something entirely different. This was a razor-sharp, deliberate exclusion. I stared at that text message for a very long time, and then I did something incredibly petty again. I ordered a massive, extravagant Thanksgiving meal from a Michelin-starred restaurant downtown. I got the full spread, truffle-infused risotto, dry-aged Wagyu beef, a delicate dessert flight, the whole 9 yards, and I posted a single, high-quality picture on Instagram. My massive marble dining table, beautifully set for exactly one person, against the stunning backdrop of the illuminated Chicago skyline. No caption, just the photo. Chloe viewed it, so did my mom. Neither of them liked it. But I knew for a fact they saw it. That was enough for me. Christmas was somehow even worse. Not only was I not invited, but they actively lied to me about it. Around mid-December, Chloe texted me, "Hey Julian, just so you're in the loop, Mom is exhausted. We're keeping it super simple this year. Everyone's just doing their own thing at home. No big family Christmas party." I replied, "Cool, hope you enjoy the rest." Christmas morning rolled around. I was sitting in my penthouse, drinking espresso, and I got curious. Just a weird gut hunch. So, I opened Facebook. Chloe had gone live. There she was, standing in my parents' giant living room, completely decked out in expensive gold ornaments, standing in front of a 12-foot Christmas tree surrounded by absolute mountains of wrapped gifts. My mom and dad were wearing matching silk pajamas. Grandma Rose was there, sitting in the corner, holding her classic spiked eggnog. Cousins, aunts, even loud Uncle Marcus. Literally everyone in the family was there. Except for me. I didn't watch the whole sickening video. Just enough to feel the tight knot in my stomach harden into something sharp and cold. Just enough to hear someone I am 99% sure it was my mom say loudly in the background, "Thank God Julian's gloomy little cloud isn't here to ruin the aesthetics this year." That one sentence stuck in my brain like a rusty nail. I didn't text them. I didn't call and scream. I just quietly closed the app and sat there in total silence. The warm lights from my own designer tree were reflecting off the freezing glass windows. I was completely alone, but strangely, I felt incredibly clear-headed, because something inside me finally broke that day. And sometimes, when something breaks completely, you stop tiptoeing around the shards. You stop shrinking yourself down to fit into their tiny, suffocating frame, and instead, you start building your own damn house. It didn't happen overnight, but that precise moment, that fake-out Christmas betrayal, that was the absolute last time I ever let myself be the quiet, obedient shadow in the background of their lives. And I really wish I could say the story ended right there, that I just cut them off, enjoyed my millions, and moved on peacefully. But no, the real, earth-shattering betrayal hadn't even happened yet. That came in the spring. Update 1. It was early April, just as the bitter Chicago snow finally started to melt and the air in the city turned sharp with the possibility of spring. I got an unexpected phone call from Grandma Rose. She very rarely called my phone. She usually just sent postcards from her travels, or sometimes a weirdly formatted email with no subject line. But this time, she called. "Julian, honey," she said, her voice sounding incredibly warm but noticeably shaky. "I need a rather large favor." "Anything, Grandma," I said immediately, standing up from my desk. "I need you to come with me to my lawyer's office downtown." That was definitely new. "Are you okay? Is it your heart?" "Oh, I'm perfectly fine. I'm just getting my final affairs in order. I thought you should be there in the room. I'm changing some very important things." I didn't press her for details. I just told her I'd meet her there. When I showed up at the address, she gave me a long, tight hug and told me how incredibly proud she was of me. She said she saw my photo in some obscure business article online. "Your company was mentioned in Forbes, Julian," she whispered to me in the lobby like it was a highly classified state secret. I smiled gently. "You read Forbes now, Grandma?" She patted my cheek. "I read absolutely everything if it mentions my handsome grandson." We sat down in a quiet, aggressively air-conditioned office overlooking the Chicago River while her lawyer, a very sharp, no-nonsense man named Elias, went through her newly revised will. I honestly didn't even know Grandma Rose had that much wealth to leave behind, but apparently, she did. She owned a historic brownstone in the city, a massive portfolio of blue-chip stocks she'd been quietly holding since the 80s, some very valuable vintage jewelry, and a few classic cars. And she had legally left the vast majority of it, nearly 85% of her total estate, not to my mom Brenda, not to the golden child Chloe, but to me. I sat there stunned. I didn't know what to say. I didn't ask for this money. I didn't need it, and I certainly didn't want to be caught in the middle of the inevitable family bloodbath. Grandma just reached over, patted my hand firmly, and said, "Julian, you've always made your own way in this world. Absolutely no one in this family ever gave you a single thing. This is just me finally giving back to the only one who deserves it." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Grandma, are you sure this won't cause massive problems?" She let out a dry, raspy laugh. "Oh, honey, the problems already exist. This just brings them into the light." A week later, Chloe somehow found out, and the entire family dynamic completely exploded. I still don't know exactly how Chloe learned about the specific will changes right away. I had never been explicitly told to keep it a secret, but Grandma and I had a mutual, unspoken understanding. We weren't broadcasting it to the world. It wasn't about revenge for me. It wasn't about the money at all. It was about pure acknowledgement. A quiet, Profound thank you from the only person in my entire bloodline who ever really saw me. But Chloe? Chloe absolutely did not see it that way. It started with an aggressive text message on a Tuesday night. Chloe, we need to talk. Right now. I stared at my glowing screen for a full minute before responding. Me, is everything okay? Chloe, did you manipulate Grandma Rose? I blinked at the screen. I literally laughed out loud in my empty apartment. The accusation was so completely absurd, so incredibly unhinged, I thought it had to be a typo or a sick joke, but I knew her tone. I knew exactly how sharp and vicious she could be when she was cornered. Her claws always came out when control started slipping through her perfectly manicured fingers. Me? Excuse me? Chloe, I just spoke to Mom. She heard from Aunt Helen, who heard from Grandma's neighbor, who saw you leaving her lawyer's office downtown. So, I'll ask you again, Julian, what exactly did you do to her? Me, I didn't do anything. Chloe, Grandma made her own choices about her own life. Chloe, don't be smug with me, you little freak, this isn't over. Not by a long shot. And just like that, the golden child went totally nuclear. The next few weeks were eerily quiet on the surface, but behind the scenes, I started getting massive waves of subtle, coordinated family backlash. My mom stopped replying to my texts entirely, not even a passive-aggressive thumbs-up emoji. My dad, who usually played the cowardly, neutral middleman in family disputes, called my voicemail and left a message that was just a long, heavy sigh, followed by, "I really hope you're happy with what you've torn apart." Then came the email from Chloe. It was long, unhinged, and clearly written after days of bitter stewing. The subject line read, "You need to understand the damage you've done." In the email, Chloe outlined every single perceived injustice she had ever suffered in her life. She talked about how she had carried the heavy burden of the family legacy. Not just literally, Chicago was still shaking off the bitter winter frost, but emotionally. I went weeks without a single message from home. No one called to ask how my company was doing. No invites for Easter dinner. No thinking of you texts. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just being overlooked by them, I was being actively, aggressively excluded as an enemy. And yeah, I'll admit, it got to me a lot more than I care to admit. There were long nights where I just sat alone in my massive penthouse, this beautiful, ridiculous, expensive place I'd dreamed about owning since I was a broke 20-year-old eating ramen. And I felt entirely hollow. I felt like I'd built this incredible life, climbed out of the mud with my bare hands, planted my flag at the top of the mountain, only to realize that literally no one cared. Worse, they actively resented me for surviving. I stopped checking my social media. I stopped taking phone calls from unknown numbers. I went into what I called maintenance mode. Wake up at 5 a.m., shower, code for 1-2 hours, hit the gym, sleep, repeat. No joy, no passion, just pure survival. The absolute lowest point came in late April. I was scheduled to be a guest keynote speaker at a major tech startup conference downtown. It was a huge honor. But that morning, I woke up, stared at my exhausted face in the bathroom mirror, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't move. I couldn't put on the expensive tailored blazer or force the fake, confident smile I usually summon from nowhere. Instead, I emailed the event organizer and made up a pathetic excuse. I said I had severe food poisoning, anything to avoid showing up and being perceived. Then I sat down on the cold floor of my kitchen, my back pressed against the mahogany cabinets, all the lights off, while the city pulsed and breathed around me, totally alive and completely uncaring. That was rock bottom. And from there, something unexpected finally happened. I broke, but not in the tragic way I feared. I finally let go. I let go of their toxic voices in my head. I let go of the crushing expectations, of the desperate idea that I'd ever be good enough for Brenda and Chloe, or that I even needed to be. It started very small. I took a long walk through Millennium Park without my phone. I sat on a freezing wooden bench for 2 hours and just watched strangers pass by, realizing they all had their own complex lives. Then I walked into an indie bookstore and bought a paperback novel. Fiction, not business strategy. I read the entire thing in 2 days. I started saying yes to things again. Quiet, normal things. I got coffee with an old college buddy. I accepted a dinner invite from my neighbor down the hall. I completely stopped performing and just showed up as myself. I called Grandma Rose one night, and we talked on the phone for 3 straight hours. We didn't talk about the will, or the money, or Chloe's insanity. We just talked about life. She told me about her very first job as a switchboard operator in the 1960s, and how she used to knit sweaters during her breaks. I told her I'd started sketching again, a hobby I hadn't touched since high school art class. "Send me one of your drawings, Julian," she demanded warmly. So I did. It was a rough, messy charcoal sketch of the Chicago skyline at dusk, but she framed it in silver and hung it in her hallway. "You've got your own beautiful way of seeing the world," she told me. "Don't you ever let those miserable people take that away from you." Something major shifted in my brain after that phone call. Work got significantly better, not because the market changed, but because my mindset did. I started actively mentoring the younger junior developers on our software team. I took deep pride in helping them find their footing in a brutal industry. I stopped obsessing over hitting the next billion-dollar milestone and started actually enjoying the massive success I'd already built. Then, out of nowhere, I got a LinkedIn message from a woman named Maya. She was a senior producer at a boutique documentary startup, one of those edgy, high-quality human interest companies with a massive cult following on YouTube. She'd seen my name on that obscure Forbes list and dug much deeper. She saw the open-source coding libraries I'd helped build for free. She wanted to do a short, 20-minute video feature on me. The invisible founder, she wanted to call it. The anti-spotlight tech guy who built an empire in total silence. I hesitated at first. A deep part of me still violently flinched at the thought of being perceived by the public. But another part, a newer, much stronger part, leaned into the fear. I said yes. We filmed for an entire week. Nothing flashy or arrogant. Just me in my apartment, making espresso, walking through the snowy city streets, talking openly about building things when absolutely no one is watching you. Laptop open, reading strangers say the exact words I'd waited my entire life to hear from my own mother. I cried. Not dramatically, just quietly. That was the exact moment I realized a fundamental truth. I didn't need my family's permission to matter. I never did. But still, just when I had finally found my peace, just when I had completely stopped caring what they thought about me, Chloe came back. And this time, she didn't just come with angry texts. She brought lawyers. She brought wild accusations. And she brought a legal storm I honestly didn't see coming. Update 2. When Chloe re-entered my life, she didn't knock politely. She kicked the front door. It was brutally simple. Chloe was officially contesting Grandma Rose's newly revised will. She was formally claiming that Grandma was suffering from a lack of testamentary capacity. She claimed that I had exerted undue influence, and that I had maliciously manipulated a frail, confused elderly woman into rewriting her entire estate to benefit myself. I sat down on my couch for a long while, that stupid, heavy letter resting open in my lap. I just breathed. I didn't even think about the logistics yet. I just breathed in and out. And then, slowly, I started to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was exactly, perfectly what I should have expected from her. This was Chloe's ultimate endgame. If she couldn't control the narrative of my life, she was going to rewrite it by force in a courtroom. I immediately called Grandma Rose, and gently told her about the legal letter. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she let out this dry, bitter chuckle. I was honestly wondering when that greedy girl would pull something exactly like this. She's legally claiming you aren't of sound mind, Grandma, I said softly, hating the words as they left my mouth. Oh, please, Grandma replied sharply. I am more lucid at 75 than your mother Brenda was at 40. That made me smile, but it didn't change the grim reality of the situation. If this dragged on, it could get incredibly messy, wildly expensive, and very public, and Chloe knew that. She was betting the house that I would fold. She assumed I would get exhausted, that I would walk away from the money just to preserve my newly found peace. She completely failed to realize that something fundamental inside me had permanently changed. I wasn't playing defense anymore. For most of my life, I had responded to my family's abuse by shrinking, getting smaller, softer, and easier to step on. But now I was totally done being quiet. And if she really wanted a war, I wasn't going to fight it like a terrified victim. I was going to fight it like a man who had finally learned how to stand up and destroy his enemies. So, I hired a lawyer. And I didn't just hire any lawyer. I hired Elias Vance. Elias was a ruthless corporate litigator who owed me a massive favor from my early startup days. He wasn't flashy. He didn't wear bright power suits or scream in court. He was cold, surgical, methodical, and absolutely terrifying during cross-examinations. He met me at a high-end coffee shop near the Loop, shook my hand firmly, and said, "Julian, are you ready to play the long, ugly game?" I nodded. "Burn it down, Elias." We immediately got to work. The very first thing Elias did was pull Grandma Rose's medical records. Not just the basics, but the extensive files Grandma had voluntarily submitted during her initial estate planning meetings. We had her recent physicals, her intensive neurological exams, and a signed, sworn affidavit from her primary care doctor confirming her perfect cognitive health. Elias organized all of it into a massive, intimidating black binder the size of a cinder block and affectionately labeled it Exhibit Fortress. Next, Elias's private investigators dug deep into Chloe's personal timeline. We wanted to know exactly when she was told about the will, how long she waited to contest it, and most importantly, her current financial situation. It turned out the golden girl was slipping badly. Chloe was drowning. She had maxed out 4 separate credit cards to the tune of $150,000. She had completely defaulted on her massive law school loans. And the biggest secret of all? She hadn't just taken a leave of absence from her prestigious law firm. She had been quietly, permanently fired 6 months ago for severe ethical violations regarding client billing. The perfect, flawless daughter was entirely broke and desperate, and now she desperately needed grandma's estate as a financial lifeline. Meanwhile, I started building a completely different kind of case. Not legal, but personal. I began meticulously documenting everything from our past. I pulled every single family photo I had that clearly showed the insane difference in how we were treated. Birthday party photos where Chloe had towering, multi-tiered custom cakes while mine had a single, sad candle stuck in a grocery store muffin. Christmas morning photos showing the tree buried in expensive gifts with Chloe's name tags, while my tiny pile had maybe 3 cheap shirts. I found old, saved emails from my mom completely dismissing my college achievements. I printed out texts from Chloe mocking my early tech career, all perfectly dated, all archived, but the real, devastating preparation started when I made a final decision. If I was going to fight this lawsuit, I wasn't just going to protect myself and my money, I was going to expose the entire toxic rot of my family to the light. Not out of petty spite, but out of a desperate need for the truth. Because if Chloe was willing to literally burn down grandma's legacy and drag her name through court just to get her greedy hands on a brownstone and some stocks, the absolute least I could do was make sure the entire world knew exactly what kind of monster she really was. I called Grandma Rose again and asked her if she was okay with me documenting the dark side of our family history. She didn't hesitate. Do it, Julian. Tell the absolute truth. I am so tired of people pretending. So, I got to work. I started writing, recording, and piecing it all together like a massive jigsaw puzzle. My childhood, the blatant favoritism, the emotional erasure. The way every single success of mine was treated like a lucky fluke, while every minor, expected achievement of Chloe's was paraded around like the second coming of Christ. I tracked down my old high school science teacher, who vividly remembered how Mom used to send massive, expensive gift baskets when Chloe got a B+, but how I once brought home the first place state science trophy and Brenda told me, "That's nice, Julian, but try to be a bit more well-rounded like your sister." I even tracked down my old high school guidance counselor, who remembered how my college recommendation letters almost didn't get sent, because my mom literally insisted Chloe needed priority bandwidth on the home computer to chat with her friends. One by one, I stitched together a massive, suffocating quilt of quiet, insidious injustices. I didn't know exactly how I'd use it yet, but it felt amazing, like sharpening a very long blade and just waiting for the right moment to swing. Then Elias called me. Chloe's legal team is officially requesting mediation. I paused, surprised. Already? One? They're incredibly nervous, Elias said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. They're trying to find a quiet compromise before this hits a public courtroom and becomes something bigger. I knew exactly what that meant. They wanted hush money. They would come in with big, empathetic words and fake concern. "Let's avoid hurting the family," they'd say. "Maybe you keep the stock portfolio, she gets the brownstone, and you both walk away as friends." Elias was quiet for a second. "You absolutely do not have to agree to this, Julian. We can go straight to court and crush them. But mediation is a very good place to show them exactly how outmatched they are." I smiled coldly. "Book the room." We chose a completely neutral space, a high-end firm in downtown Chicago that specialized in wealthy family mediations. It had glass walls, soft ambient lighting, and absolutely no clocks on the walls. The kind of expensive place specifically designed to feel safe while tearing people's lives apart. Chloe walked in wearing an all-white cashmere sweater, highly symbolic, playing the pure, innocent victim. She looked exhausted, hollow in the eyes, her makeup failing to hide the dark circles. But when she saw me sitting there, she immediately smirked like this was just another high school debate performance she was destined to win. I didn't speak a single word for the first hour. Her overpriced lawyer laid out her concerns in soft, polite tones. They heavily implied Grandma Rose had been confused, that I had deliberately isolated her from the family, that I had maliciously taken advantage of her fondness for me to steal the inheritance. Elias just sat there, completely stone-faced, and let them finish their entire pathetic speech. Then, Elias calmly opened the exhibit fortress binder. He began ruthlessly, methodically flipping through the exhibits. He showed them the airtight medical forms, the timestamps, the emails. He played a crystal clear voicemail from Grandma Rose on his laptop that said, "I know Brenda and Chloe won't understand, but I am doing this for Julian. He has earned it, and they have done nothing but take." Chloe didn't flinch. Not once. She just sat there, her jaw clenched, waiting until it was her turn to speak again. And that's when she made her absolute final, fatal mistake. "I'm just saying," Chloe said, her voice thick and syrupy with fake concern. "It's incredibly interesting that Julian suddenly became so close to Grandma right after she sold those vintage cars. The ones we didn't know were so valuable." Elias slowly raised an eyebrow. "Are you officially suggesting financial misconduct on my client's part, Miss Vance?" Chloe shrugged innocently. "I don't know. I just think it's very interesting timing." That was her brilliant new strategy. Not just to paint me as manipulative, but as an active, dangerous financial predator. And in that precise moment, I knew this wasn't about the inheritance money at all. It never was. It was purely about control. She physically couldn't bear the thought that I possessed something she didn't. Not the money, not the property, but the dignity, the legacy. The one thing she had desperately chased her entire miserable life and never actually earned. That night, I went back to my penthouse and opened my laptop. I took all the stories, the emails, the damning evidence, the recordings, and I started building a new narrative. Not just for the judge, but for the entire world. I called the project The Glass Sibling. What happens when the quiet one finally speaks? I didn't post it. Not yet. I was still waiting for the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. Because earlier that month, I had found something else. Something incredible in Grandma Rose's rented storage unit that she had completely forgotten about, something from decades ago. And when I opened that dusty cardboard box and saw what was inside, it changed absolutely everything. The box was simply labeled 1985 to 2010. Personal. It was written on a piece of peeling masking tape in Grandma's faded blue marker. It had been sitting completely untouched in a climate-controlled storage unit she rented back when she sold her original family home. I never would have found it if I hadn't offered to help her clear the space out to save on rental fees. I honestly thought it would just be old winter sweaters, faded family photos, maybe some dusty kitchen knickknacks, but inside that box was the absolute final nail in Chloe's perfectly polished coffin. There were 4 thick, leather-bound journals. They were heavily worn from years of flipping pages. At first, I hesitated to open them. It felt invasive. But Grandma was sitting right beside me in a folding chair, a blanket over her knees. She nodded at the books and said, "Go on, Julian. Read them. I saved them for a very specific reason." So, I opened the first one. What I found inside wasn't just a quaint family history. It was a meticulous, devastating record. A quiet, undeniable witness to everything I had been aggressively gaslit into forgetting. There were hundreds of entries spanning decades. Detailed descriptions of ruined birthdays, hijacked holidays, and ignored report cards. My name came up constantly. She wrote about how I had always tried to help Mom in the kitchen, only to be shooed away, how I had made Grandma laugh when I was 7 by pretending to be a robot, how my mom never attended a single one of my middle school science fairs because Chloe had very important cheerleading practice, and then, the smoking guns. Grandma had documented how Chloe once literally stole a prestigious tech camp scholarship application I was supposed to mail out, and threw it in the trash so I wouldn't embarrass her by going to the same summer program as her friends. There were physical copies of letters Grandma had sent to my parents, begging them to treat me with more care and attention. And attached were copies of their replies, cold, dismissive, arrogant letters always circling back to, "Chloe needs our full attention right now. Julian is fine on his own." One specific entry from the 14th of October 2002 stopped me completely cold. Julian asked me today why his parents never come to his chess tournaments. He was so incredibly quiet when he asked. He looked down at his shoes the whole time. I wanted to cry. I told him they were just very busy with work. But the ugly truth is, Brenda told me yesterday that Julian is not really a performer, and that he's just not built for competition like Chloe. I think about that poor boy a lot. How a child so young can already fully understand what it means to be utterly unwanted. I put the heavy journal down. My chest felt incredibly heavy. Not with sadness, but with something much closer to profound confirmation. It was the kind of deep grief that comes not from surprise, but from sudden recognition. Like finally finding the one lost piece that proves your puzzle wasn't broken, it was just missing the truth. This was it. This was the exact weapon I needed. The very next morning, I called Elias. "I want to go to trial," I said, my voice rock steady. "Absolutely no settlement. No mediation. I want every single piece of this on the public court record." Elias paused for a moment. "Are you entirely sure, Julian? Once we open this box in court, you can't close it." "She started this war," I said. "Let me finish it." We officially filed for trial, and while the slow court system prepared its gears, I prepared my own massive strike. The documentary piece I had started with Maya, the glass sibling, wasn't just a vanity project anymore. I turned it into a full, 45-minute narrative feature. It wasn't just about my tech success anymore, it was about children who are sidelined, gaslit, and erased in favor of a golden sibling. The overlooked. The underestimated. I partnered heavily with Maya's media group, and we built out a stunning, heartbreaking film. It featured personal stories, expert psychological interviews on family scapegoating, B-roll footage from my lonely childhood, screenshots of the toxic texts, and yes, high-resolution scans of select pages from Grandma Rose's journals. We changed a few minor names for legal safety, but absolutely anyone in my family watching would know exactly who and what they were seeing. I didn't release it yet. That devastating drop would come later, at the absolutely perfect time. Trial day finally arrived. The courtroom was freezing cold. Chloe arrived flanked by a team of 3 expensive lawyers in sharp suits carrying leather briefcases. She wore a conservative navy dress and subtle makeup designed to make her look sympathetic. I arrived with Elias and Grandma Rose, who insisted on being wheeled in despite her arthritis acting up. The judge was a no-nonsense, gray-haired woman in her 60s with small glasses, the kind of veteran judge who had seen through every cheap legal trick in the book. From the very first second, Elias completely controlled the room. He was calm, focused, and lethal. He immediately brought up the medical documentation, the timestamps, the signed doctor letters, and the video testimony we had recorded with Grandma months earlier. The video where she clearly, lucidly stated in her own words, "I am not being pressured by anyone, I know exactly what I am doing. Julian has always been there for me. This is my choice, and mine alone." Chloe's legal team started frantically trying to poke holes. They brought up my sudden suspicious interest in the family. They tried to suggest I had always been withdrawn, calculating, and emotionally distant, framing my childhood neglect as a personality defect. Then, Chloe took the stand to testify. She actually managed to force real tears. She told the court she loved Grandma deeply, that she was only fighting for what was fair and right, that she didn't want to sue her own brother, but she had to because she was terrified Grandma had been cruelly misled by me. Then Elias stood up for cross-examination. He walked slowly to the podium, adjusted his notes, and asked one single question. "Miss Vance, do you recall ever taking deliberate steps to limit Julian's academic or financial opportunities?" Chloe blinked, clearly thrown off. "Excuse me? Did you ever intentionally interfere with his scholarships, his college applications, or his educational opportunities?" Chloe's lead lawyer shot up. "Objection, relevance." The judge held up a hand, her eyes locked on Chloe. "Overruled. Answer the question, Miss Vance." Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her wooden seat. "No, of course not, we were children." Elias nodded slowly. "Then perhaps you can explain this to the court." He walked over to the evidence table and picked up a clear plastic sleeve. Inside was the crumpled tech camp scholarship form from 2004. My name was at the top. And in the margins, in Chloe's unmistakable, loopy handwriting, were the words, "He's not even going to get in. Just don't give him false hope." Chloe completely froze. The color instantly drained from her face. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to melt into the floorboards. But Elias wasn't even close to done. He brought out the journals. Not all of them, just the highly relevant entries. The ones that explicitly showed a consistent, years-long pattern of emotional neglect, manipulation, and active silencing by Chloe and Brenda. He read them aloud, slowly, letting the heavy silence after each devastating word hang in the freezing courtroom air. And then came Elias's final closing argument. He stood in the center of the room, hands folded, and said, "Your Honor, this case is not about a stolen inheritance. This case is about basic acknowledgement. It is about a profoundly toxic family that built its entire world around one golden child, and casually discarded the other. And now that discarded child, the quiet one, is simply receiving what his grandmother legally and morally believes he deserves. Not because he manipulated her. Not because he asked for it. But, simply because he earned it." The verdict was swift and absolutely brutal. The judge ruled entirely in my favor. The court upheld Grandma Rose's revised will as 100% valid and legally unchallengeable. Furthermore, Chloe was sternly ordered to pay my substantial legal fees for filing a blatantly frivolous and malicious contestation. She left the courtroom without saying a single word, her face pale and furious. But I wasn't done. That very same night, I hit upload. I released the Glass sibling documentary on YouTube and across all major social media platforms. It didn't just go viral overnight, it exploded in a matter of hours. Tens of thousands of views became hundreds of thousands, then millions. National journalists reached out, major podcasts wanted interviews. Thousands of people, adult children, family therapists, domestic abuse advocates reached out to thank me for putting something so invisible and painful into words. The fallout for Chloe was absolute and total. The internet is undefeated when it comes to identifying villains. Within 48 hours, her former law firm released a statement distancing themselves from her. A new residency offer she had been desperately trying to secure was quietly and permanently withdrawn. Her fiancé, the one who laughed at me at the retirement dinner, broke off the engagement when the extent of her massive secret debt became public knowledge. Her public social media accounts were flooded with angry comments until she was forced to delete them entirely. The golden girl was reduced to ash. A few extended family members, including loud Uncle Marcus, called me privately to say, "Julian, we had absolutely no idea it was this bad." I didn't respond to a single one of them. Because it wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about pure, undeniable clarity. It was about finally forcing them to look at reality and saying, "This happened. I was here. I mattered." My mom, Brenda, eventually called. She left a pathetic, shaking voicemail. "I don't know why you had to do all this to us, Julian. You destroyed your sister's life. I hope you're incredibly proud of yourself." I didn't call her back. I simply blocked the number and deleted the voicemail. Last week, Grandma Rose and I spent her 76th birthday together. We sat out on the massive balcony of my Gold Coast penthouse, drinking expensive champagne and watching the beautiful city lights dance against the dark water of Lake Michigan. She looked over at me, smiled her warm, familiar smile, and said, "Took long enough to get here, huh?" "Yeah," I said, smiling back as the cold wind hit my face. "But I finally got here." And as the sun began to rise over the city we both loved, I finally let the heavy, suffocating past rest. Because for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't desperately trying to prove anything to anyone. I had absolutely nothing left to prove. The quiet one never stays quiet forever. Sometimes, he just waits patiently in the shadows until the entire world is finally forced to listen.